Welcome all of you to the Estes Valley Watershed Coalition for a talk with Greenwood Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. A little bit about what the Watershed Coalition does. We have been around since the flood in 2013, and we restored much of the valley at that time. We're still at it today, doing fire mitigation and replanting along riparian areas. And we have talks every month. So I'd like to introduce Ollie Moreno, who is the education and front desk coordinator at Greenwood. And she has a real passion for wild animals. She's got great stories to tell tonight, so I'm looking forward to it. So enjoy.
All right, you guys, thanks for having me. So my name's Ollie, and I came to Greenwood via Denver Public Schools. I spent 12 years as an elementary school librarian before I found my way to Greenwood, and it's the luckiest place because I can be a teacher without a whole lot of the teacher responsibilities. So I get to teach kids and be passionate with kids in a way that maybe I wasn't allowed to be in a classroom because I didn't have enough time to get to the things that I really wanted to teach kids. So this has been a great thing for me. I've been at Greenwood since 2016. So I started at the front desk, and what we learned is that education and front desk are really tied together. The front desk fields over 12,000 phone calls a year, and every single one of those phone calls is an opportunity to talk to the public about wildlife and how to humanely interact with wildlife with the least interventions. So they really are kind of the same child. So Greenwood's mission is to provide compassionate care to orphaned, injured, and sick wildlife. We're located just down the road from Lyons. We've been a haven for wildlife for 40 years. And our expertise, kindness, and willingness to collaborate allows us to meet the needs of our community, including people and wildlife. So we work probably with 50 different organizations on a regular basis. We have 2 in-house vets that come through. We host CU vet students once a week. We have close to 300 volunteers in the summertime who work basically from 5 in the morning till midnight every day in 3 different shifts. So we push about 500 animals. We can have up to 500 animals on site at a time. And I think we were at almost 3,900 animals when I left Greenwood today that we've taken in as patients this year. 3,900 animals so far. So what do? We're the only rehabilitation facility treating birds and mammals, basically from Pueblo to the Wyoming border. We have people call us from Cheyenne all the time. Hey, can I bring you stuff? No, you're on the wrong side of the line. Sometimes we might have told them to pretend they were a mile or 2 south. But we really can't take in animals from Wyoming, and we try really hard not to. We treat thousands of animals annually, and we can see over 246 different species of animal in a year. We have an animal kitchen that has cookbooks for every single one of those species with their dietary needs. So anytime somebody comes in, we can immediately start cooking for them. So there are some animals we're not licensed for. We can't take reptiles and amphibians, no snapping turtles, they hurt, and they're really big. So no, none of those guys. We can't take striped skunks. That's because they're considered patient 0 for rabies. They can pass it without ever showing symptoms of it. And so that's why we don't have those guys. we can't take domestic ducks, and there's currently a problem in Longmont down on McIntosh Lake. There are 2 Peking ducks that somebody released because they didn't want to be responsible for them anymore. And we're trying to corral them so that we can get them to a farm rescue before winter really sets in, because they don't have the skills to make it through a winter in Colorado on their own. So they're really dependent on people. So we need to get them back into people if we can. No mountain goats, no big ungulates, no elk. Please don't bring me elk. Don't show up in the parking lot with baby fawn. It's not good for them. And it's hard on us. We're going to make you put it right back where you found it, like right exactly back where you found it. Because those guys can carry chronic wasting disease, so we can't rehab them. And then birds of prey, go to the Birds of Prey Foundation down in Broomfield. There's also the Carey Center here in Estes Park that will take these guys. They know what they're doing with them, and they eat most of the things that we rehab. So our patients get a little uncomfortable and nervous when these guys come in, but they do come in occasionally. We had somebody bring us a bald eagle from Rabbit Mountain last summer. So, and then bats go to special people because we don't have them at all. So I wanted to talk about the Pelican Project. And this is a project that I do with kids. And I forgot my folder. And so we're just going to kind of talk about it a little bit. I'm probably not going to pass it out. But we're going to kind of talk about it in such a way because I kind of want us to get thinking about what a rehabber is and what they actually do. So Pete was a pelican who came into Greenwood. He had fishing line wrapped around both of his legs. He had a hook completely through the webbing of his foot. He was skinny, and he had pouch lice, which is these little bugs that get in the folds and they stay there forever. It's horrible. Anyway, so he came to Greenwood. And so when I go in and talk to 4th graders, I walk in and they get to see, I didn't think about this. So the first thing they get to see is like an exam sheet. So when these guys come in, you guys can pass that around. When these guys come in, we really look them over well. When they're injured, a lot of times we will give them some pain meds and a timeout because nobody needs to be poked and prodded while they're hurting. So we'll look at everything about these guys, how much they weigh, what their sex is. Are they bright and alert, or are they ADR, which really literally stands for ain't doing right, which I find funny. We'll talk about what their body looks like, what their arms, legs, feet, fur, feathers, everything looks like. And then we'll start to talk about what the path to recovery for this guy is. So for Pete, on the next page of that is an x-ray of Pete's actual foot. So I'm sure it'll come back around. But the kids get to see that there's actually a hook through his foot. It's a J hook. I don't fish, so I don't really know a whole lot about this, except for it looks like a J, and it's got a round circle at one end and a barb on the other end. So what I tell kids is you can't push that through. If you push it through, you're going to hurt him. If you push it back, you're going to hurt him. So you can't do that. I also tell kids that one of the tools in a wildlife rehabilitator's toolbox is euthanasia. There are some things we can't fix. So for example, a couple of years ago, we had a peacock come in. Peacocks are not wild in Colorado, but if they come in, we will look at them. So we had a peacock come in. It had been hit by a car. Its entire pelvis was shattered. That is not something I'm ever going to be able to fix. And he's never going to be a successful peacock again. So the kindest thing we can do for that animal is to end his suffering and help him on to the next life. If we can fix it, that's always our choice. But we have to acknowledge that we're not God, and some things we can't fix. And for those instances, we have a tool, and it's euthanasia, and it's We have a great room for it at Greenwood. It's a very small, quiet room. We can turn the lights off. We have nature sounds playing in there all the time. And we walk out of the room because we know that our presence as humans to those prey animals make them uncomfortable. So we just walk out of the room and they pass quietly, humanely, and then they get to go to the Museum of Nature and Science where the grad students poke and prod and pull and test and do all of those fun things. So Pete's got this problem. He's got this hook. He's got this pouch lice. He's skinny. So I asked kids to come up with 3 possible solutions and to think about what the pros and cons are. So inevitably in every group, a group of boys will tell me, we're going to cut it off. We're going to amputate Pete's foot. We're going to get him a robotic prosthetic. We're going to teach him how to use it. He's going to have a great life. This is not practical and it's not possible because we lack the ability to communicate with Pete. Like we can't talk to Pete and tell him, okay, do this, then that, then that. And the rehab for that is immense. And then if we let him go, what if something happens to his prosthetic? Then he's out there in the wild with no prosthetic and it's really bad. So inevitably, that's what they say. Always there is a group of girls who tell us that we shouldn't do anything. Well, the end result of that is Pete isn't mobile because he's got fishing line around his legs. He's already getting skinny. If we don't do anything, Pete's gonna die. And Pete doesn't have injuries and problems that really require him to die. These are all things that are really simply fixed. And so we work through this problem with these kids and eventually we come down to somebody, I'll tell somebody, does your dad have a shed? And we'll start talking about the tools in the shed because the solution for Pete is a pair of tin snips. Just cut the hook, pull it from both sides. He needs some antibiotics. He's going to have to stay with us for about a week. We're going to need to work on getting some of that pouch lice out, which is difficult. You have to kind of straddle the bird, and one person straddles the bird to keep his wings in and keep him under control, and the other person has to pull his bill down and pick out those lice with tweezers. Just like going to the dentist, Pete can stand it for about 45 minutes, and then Pete doesn't want to do that again till tomorrow. So we get as many of them as we can while he's in our care, but we know that we're never going to get them all, and it's fine. It's fine. Pete's going to go out and live a great life, even if he has pouch lice. Most pelicans do have pouch lice, so we're just trying to ease it a little bit. So the end result is we get a pair of tin snips. Pete gets some antibiotics. We get him some fish. Pelicans will not eat fish tails first because they'll struggle against the esophagus. So if you give a pelican a fish tail first, he will throw it in the air so that he can flip it and it goes down head first. So he swims down. Weird. And Pete was fine. We let him back out on Longmont Lake and he got to leave with his flock. So we had him for less than 2 weeks, put him right back where his family was. And we assume that Pete has had like 17 children now. Because he was pretty young and pelicans actually can live a really long time. And they have 2 to 3 babies a year. So 17 seems like a good round number for Pete. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about you guys and how you guys came to be and kind of how the floods affected Greenwood and changed kind of some of the things at Greenwood. So just quick facts. You guys know all of this so much better than me. But the rain started on September 9th and it ended on September 16th. Over 4,500 square miles were flooded in Colorado. We had $4 billion in damages, 9 fatalities, 19,000 people were evacuated, 3,000 were rescued, 26,000 homes were damaged, 2,006 homes were destroyed, 750 businesses were damaged, 200 businesses were destroyed, and there were 200 miles of road damaged. But what about the wildlife? Because we were really caught up in the human drama of that, right? It was life and death for people that we know, our neighbors, our friends, Coloradans. So it was appropriate to not be focused on that. And so we started asking questions afterwards and kind of trying to assess what the ecological effect of the flood was going to be. So in the long term, ecologists believe that it's likely to benefit many native species. And that's because we know that if you scour rivers out, it refreshes the whole environment and things become more healthy. It can help us to maintain a healthy ecosystem, to push the debris and the silt downstream and kind of clean everything out. So long term, we expect that this is going to be beneficial to the wildlife in the area. Short term, it was real horrible. Flooding caused mortality. We know that burrowing animals, so snakes, mice, prairie dogs, these guys were most likely to suffer the worst outcomes because they were underground and many of them can't swim. So short term, it was kind of rough. At Greenwood, so we're about 2 miles down from Lyons, we had water to our front door. We were closed for, I think, 5 days, which we had never done in history. And it was a real interesting situation. I know that rehabbers took animals home because the National Guard was at our door and you had to be on a list to come in and go out. And they allowed us to take 3 cars in. And so every animal that we had inside the facility, we took with us in bins, and every animal that was in the outside cages. So everybody, when they come to Greenwood, before we let them go, they spend between a week and 2 weeks outside. We just want to make sure that they're capable of finding food, that they can fly the way they're supposed to and move the way they're supposed to and be successful. So we watch them for a week outside. Everybody in the outside cages was spontaneously released from Greenwood because they know how to protect themselves better than we do. So if they were successful enough to be outside, we released them there before the floods came through, and we hope that many of them made it up and out. We're not sure, but we hope. So one of the probably big losers from the floods was Preble's meadow jumping mouse. So even before the floods, these were federally designated as a threatened species. And their habitat is really along the riparian way. So they like to be in rock outcroppings along rivers. So they had lots of habitat along boulders, open space, and drainage. So unfortunately, the timing of the flood happening in September, these guys are starting to go into hibernation mode at that point. And if they were older mice, they already had spots and they would have been underground first. So those guys probably didn't survive. And were probably, if they were already underground, they were probably washed away. So we don't know. I haven't heard, and I did a lot of research before I got here, but I haven't heard about a study along either the St. Vrain or Boulder Creek about these guys, but I would assume that it's probably coming. It's something that somebody should look at to kind of assess if that had a lasting impact on them. We know of prairie dog towns that were completely flooded and were never active again. So aftermath at Greenwood. So immediately after the flood, so in the probably week after they let us open again, we had about 24 small mammals and songbirds come in that were direct flood victims. Babies. So squirrels have 2 sets of babies. If their first brood isn't successful in the spring, they'll have a second brood in fall. So there were fall babies in trees, and these guys were completely washed out of their nests. Their nests just didn't exist after the rains came through. we also had a problem of mountain animals, so 13-line ground squirrels and things like that coming up from Thornton. So they had washed all the way down into Denver, into the metro area. And we had many of those guys come in just absolutely displaced. Marmot, we had a marmot come up from Denver. Those guys are usually at 10 to 14,000 feet. So lots of things survived and were washed way out of their way. And then animals, we tend to believe that animals know more than we do about those kinds of surviving those kinds of natural disasters. So we think that the animals that escaped needed to find new homes because their habitat was completely destroyed. So afterwards, widespread destruction. There was so you have mice, and then we have rabbits and foxes. None of these guys now have food. Because if we washed out all of those underground guys, even if the fox made it out of the flood and then came back down, there's no more food source. So he's going to move. So the habitat destruction in the immediate aftermath pushed lots of animals out of their normal habitat. We saw a decrease in a number of species over many years, and an increase in ticks and noxious weeds. So we now, before the floods, we never had to go out, and every year we now have to go out and pull thistle. And then there's another one that Boulder County is really anti, I don't know which one, but we have to go out every year and pull them up. And we never had to do that before the floods. So by the numbers, in 2013, we took in 2,248 animals. Interesting, in 2014, we only took in about 250 more. Most years, that number seems to grow by about 500. It seems like about a year. So, and then in the last 3 years, we're taking in a bunch more animals. Most of these guys come in between April and October because it's baby season. So we get about 90% of our animals between April and October. So let's talk about Abert squirrels. So the blue columns are Boulder County and red is other counties. And before the floods, we would get 1 or 2 Abert squirrels out of Boulder County a year. We've seen 1 from Boulder County since 2016. 2016 was a blip. We had a group of 3 babies. They were from the same family come in. And then we didn't see another one until 2022. And I don't think we've seen any of them this year. I was looking this year and we haven't seen any of them. So our guess is that between fox squirrels competing for territory and the floods, these guys may not have much of a habitat left in Boulder County, at least down where people are. So bobcats. So we get bobcats every once in a while, mostly from Boulder County, and we would get 1 or 2 a year. Between 2008 and 2011, we had 4. So, but then we didn't have any for a number of years. This year, we've had a ton of them. I think we ended up with 7 bobcat kittens this summer that ended up going to a bigger facility that has better outdoor caging for those guys down in Larkspur. So they got transferred down to Larkspur, but when they're ready for release, they'll come back to Boulder County within 10 miles of where they were found. Coyotes are kind of another interesting animal. So they kind of disappeared a little bit between 2014 and 2017, but it seems like they were able to start coming back into the environment sooner. Interesting about these guys, in those years where it looks like there's only one, so like 2014, 2018, 2020, those were adults, and most of them were hit by cars. So for whatever reason, the coyote shouldn't have been on the road and was. But we saw our first kits this year that we hadn't seen kits since 2018. and we had our first kits this year for those guys. Red foxes are another interesting animal. So before the floods, we would get generally about 40 of those guys in a year, and usually in small litters, 3 or 4 at a time. And then we didn't get hardly any after the flood. So 2014, 2015, 2016, we had a litter of 5. And then 2017 was adults, 18 was adults, 19 was adults. And then in 2020, we got 2 litters, 3 and 3. And then we started getting a few more every year. So it seems like the foxes are, again, moving back into the territory, which leads me to believe that the rabbits have started to improve, that the mice have started to improve, that the area is conducive to hosting these guys again, whereas they were just gone for a number of years. And we talked about how our guess is that these guys are really adept at survival, so they probably moved for a period of time, and these aren't the same foxes that we had when we left. So it's probably not the same, it's probably their children. Wherever they moved to, the population has started to increase, which is now pushing them back down and out. So it's we know that if we take the rabbits out of the population, then the foxes go down and the raccoons go down. And then as the rabbits start to come back, the foxes come back. It's just a big circle. So if we pull those species and those prey species out of the environment, these guys don't have a choice but to move. Do you guys have any questions? Like this guy? This guy was brought in. I think that this was an adult, a sub-adult, not quite an adult, that was brought in. I think she was found in a sewage treatment water. And so she was coated, and that's why they're bathing her, because that's exactly what happened there, is she got a good bath. And I think she was found in the sewage treatment water. Or they're orphaned. But even with orphaned animals, I spend a ton of time on the phone with people talking about, hey, let's build a situation that makes it okay for mom to come back and get those guys. Because what do we know about moms, right? It takes a ton of resources to have babies, a ton of them. We are not going to abandon our children just because some person touched it. We're not going to abandon our children because it fell out of the tree. We might abandon our babies if there's a predator right next to it and I can't get to it. And so a lot of times it's talking to people about, hey, what can we do to build the right environment for this to happen? I had a lady, I tried to talk her through a raccoon reunite last summer, and she could not help but check on that raccoon every 20 minutes for 2 days. And I finally had to go and pick it up and bring it to Greenwood because she wouldn't leave it alone long enough for mom to have a chance. We know moms come and get those babies. We've got video evidence. We talk people through it every year. This year, I think we were successful in reuniting over 100 baby raccoons with a parent. That's 100 baby raccoons I didn't have to either figure out space for raising or euthanize because we didn't have it. So the more education I can do to people to get them to, it's harder with city folk, and I'm a city folk, but it's harder to remind them that, like, just because it's a baby and there's no mom around doesn't mean that you should feed it cream of wheat. Like, seriously, please stop feeding them. Babies can go 24 to 48 hours in most circumstances without any food or water, and we can still rehabilitate them. And it's better to leave them you know, if you feed that baby squirrel and then try to do a reunite, that baby squirrel is full. He's not going to cry because he's got a full belly, and mom is going to have a harder time finding him. Or if he's hungry and warm, because if he's cold, she won't take him either. But if he's hungry and warm, he's going to make a lot of noise, which is going to get mom's attention. And then it's easy for her to do, her mom thing. So a lot of times it's just talking people into doing the right thing with these guys. So raccoons, we don't want an extra 100. We raised 67 this year. That was enough. Okay. So mange is a mite. And I'm going to be really honest. It's horrible. It's horrible for us people to watch. We don't like it. It looks really ugly. But the truth of the matter is that depending on the time of the year, it's often better to wait and watch and see what happens, especially in the springtime and summer. Even if he lost all of his fur, he's not going to freeze to death. And if he loses all of his fur, the mites fall off. He can regrow a fur. He won't have mange anymore, and it'll be okay. It's real ugly to watch. So it's illegal in the state of Colorado to trap an animal for the purpose of rehabilitation. That being said, if you show up in my parking lot with an animal in a trap, I'm going to treat that animal. So if a fox, he's got mange, he's now opened up some secondary wounds. So he's scratched himself raw and he's got lesions and he's kind of bloody and pussy. That is way more concerning to me. So that guy actually needs antibiotics. If he came in, we would treat him with antibiotics and we would treat for the mange. If somebody brought us a mangy fox, we would treat for it. And then also immediately put that guy back out, because after you apply the medication, at least the way that we do it at Greenwood, it stays on for 30 days and there's no reason for me to keep him in rehab. He will get better all on his own out there where he lives. Which also makes people uncomfortable because I haven't actually, I applied some medicine to his back. People call me all the time asking about ivermectin specifically for treating mange, and we don't advise people to do that. And there's a reason for it. First of all, the dosage is determined by weight. So if you don't weigh an animal, you don't really know how much to give him, and you can give him too much. And secondly, how do you ensure that that specific animal gets the medication? Because if you provide food resources, he's not the only friend you're going to have. You're going to have extra friends. And especially with foxes, they're family units. They're last year's babies help raise this year's babies before they're sexually mature and go out on their own. So they're in families. How are you going to make sure that that one animal got the ivermectin? So we don't advise doing that because people just don't have the ability to weigh a fox. And if you do, you really probably shouldn't be. And it's dangerous. And that's the other thing too, is that wild animals, especially if they're under stress, are way unpredictable. So you don't know what. You want to help the fox, but his reaction to you is not going to see you as help. And so we want to keep people safe too. So we don't recommend that at all. But if they come in, and they do come in, we treat them and we put them right back out. Good question. Other questions? I looked, I haven't seen a single badger at Greenwood, and we are licensed for those guys. And I know that in the past we have had them. Our current record system only goes back to 2008. So when we had one, it was before 2008. Oh, found a new home. Hopefully they'll find new girlfriends and they'll have more badger babies. Mm-hmm. Right. And no, but we made it our business, really, because it's better for Greenwood for me to have an answer for you than to just say, sorry, we can't take it, you're on your own. And so I spend a lot of time reaching out to other rehabbers in the state. I make friends with CPW as much as I can, and make friends with them so that I know what their stance is on things. I'm currently trying to get them to do something about a moose in Netherlands that has slipperfoot disease. So you have to make friends with people. And so we work with CPW really closely. We have vet groups. There's probably the biggest organizations that I refer to are NOCO Wildlife up in Fort Collins is fairly new. And a lot of times they can do rescues where we can't. So I'll refer up there, and I know that they're taking like little tiny baby mammals. So at Greenwood, I can't take an eyes closed pink anything. And the reason I can't is we're not a 24-hour facility, and those baby mammals need fed every 45 minutes. NOCO is a smaller facility, and they have the ability to take those guys home with them and rehab them overnight. So if it's pink and not furred, I refer to NOCO, because if you bring it to Greenwood, we're at capacity. We can't take them. We have to euthanize them. Birds of Prey, always the Birds of Prey Foundation. And funny thing is, pigeons are eagles and eagles are pigeons. So I'm always nervous when somebody calls me about a pigeon, because I've had 2 different people tell me they thought it was a pigeon and show up with a bald eagle. It's not okay. Not okay. and then I've sent people to Birds of Prey, and Birds of Prey will call me and go, this is a poor will. This is a pigeon. Will you come get it? Because we can't take it. Our guys will eat this guy. So we do work with those guys, trading off patients so that the right people are seeing the right guys. There's a couple of organizations so Denver really has nothing, like no things. Greenwood is way up here, and the next closest facility is in Sedalia, which is on Santa Fe between Castle Rock and Littleton. And they're a little bit smaller facility, but I can send lots of things to them. So if you're south of I-70, I send you to Sedalia a lot of times, because Greenwood, we want to take in everything, but if we can get it to a place that's closest to you, first of all, we have to release within 10 miles. So if I take in a 13-line ground squirrel from Colorado Springs, I have to figure out a release site in Colorado Springs and take it there. So we try to put things to the closest facility to them for release purposes, and also because we have to be good stewards of our resources, right? I don't have the resources to take on every sick, injured, or orphaned animal in the state of Colorado. I just don't. And it really breaks my heart when people call me and I can't do anything. So that's part of the reason that we look to know who can. So I may not be able to, but I will fight tooth and toenail to find somebody that can. So, so we do Rocky Mountain Wildlife Alliance is in Sedalia, NOCO in Fort Collins. The next one is Second Chance in Pueblo. And those are the 4 biggest facilities. And the thing, Second Chance is literally in a lady's home. I don't know how she does what she does, but she's done it for years. She's really successful and she loves what she's doing. So we let her, but I don't know how she does it. Because she's literally covering an area as big as we are. She takes everything from New Mexico up and from Kansas to Utah. So we've got to put them to the right spot. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about our favorite guests this year. So Greenwood was really fortunate. We can't rehab striped squirrel or striped skunks. However, these guys we can. Why is it not working? Oh, there it went. So these guys came in. They were found in the wall of somebody's house. And there's no sound with the videos, so you can just kind of see them. They were found in Lyons, orphaned. They were in a wall, lodged in the insulation in the wall of the garage. So the guy ripped down a section of the wall in the garage to free these guys, got them out, and he's like, I don't want skunks. And I don't really blame him. Like, I don't want him living in my walls. That's probably true. But in the environment, and Lyons would have been fine. But he didn't want them at all. So we tried to reunite with mom. First of all, we excluded them. So we got them out of the wall and set up a reunite outside for mom. And then, but she didn't come. So they ended up with us. And we got to raise these guys. They were super fun. They're super cute. Interesting facts about spotted skunks over striped skunks. So these guys don't lift their tail to spray you. These guys will do a handstand, and it looks like they're playing. And if they're doing a handstand, they're not playing. We managed to nobody at Greenwood got sprayed in the entire 6 weeks that we had these guys. And they were real, like tiny when they came. They received, so they were vaccinated for, let's see. They were vaccinated for parvo, distemper, and rabies before they were released so that they can go out and be as healthy as they can. And this is just kind of the compilation video of these guys. We figured they had over 300 feedings in the 6 weeks that they were with us. We really would love to do rescues, but we just don't have the resources for it. Yep, that's what they eat in the wild. So we had interns out with nets all summer, beating the grass to bring in nuts for these guys, or to bring in live bugs for these guys. They were released back up near Lyons. And our guess is that they will stay together for the first winter. So it seems like most mammals aren't really sexually mature until that following spring, except for mice, because they're 21 days and they can be having babies. But most like adolescent fox squirrels, we think these guys, bunnies not so much. After they're big enough to leave the nest, they're pretty much on their own. But most of this size mammal kind of stay together for the winter. So when we release all of our fox squirrels, we release in the fall. Those fall babies, they go out with a nest box that gets drilled into somebody's tree, and most of them stay there for that first winter. But as soon as the trees start to get leaves, they go and make their own nest. It takes them less than a day to build their own nest. But when we release them, like we released squirrels today, it's too cold and most of the leaves are gone. So they don't really have an opportunity to build a home. So we just release them with a home. Questions about our skunk friends? Yeah, den, little den. Yeah, kind of in the rocks and in rock outcroppings. These guys were found down by the river. So we know that they're in Estes Park, because somebody was doing reno on a house up here, and he would come in and work on the weekends and leave staff and go back to town for the week and come up the next weekend, and he'd come back and there was stuff all over and missing, and apparently he was the spotted skunk was real interested in this guy's tools and just started moving stuff around, and the guy thought somebody was breaking in. And so he called the cops, and the cops went in and saw the bandit in the middle of the night moving tools around. So that was another instance of, hey, he's really cool, but I don't want him here. And so he came down. There was nothing wrong with him. But when these guys get older, I knew he was at Greenwood as soon as I pulled into the parking lot. Like, you could taste him. Like, the odor is so strong and like, you could taste him in the parking lot. So as soon as we determined that he was a fully healthy spotted skunk, he was out the door and back up here. Like, we released him within a mile of his home. We know that he probably found his way back to the house, but the guy also found out where he was getting in and closed it off. So it should be fine. Because they do have to go back where they came from. Even if it makes us uncomfortable, these guys were here before we were, and they are adept at moving between their wild spaces and our cities and towns. I get people from Denver calling me all the time. I saw a fox. I was like, well, I live in Denver. And if I walk 2 blocks from my house, there is literally a trail that I could walk from there all the way up to Morrison. Like, I could get there. We have built ways, drainages that are, we didn't build them. They were already there, but we're monopolizing them, using them. These drainages still work. And that's why you end up with a bear in Arvada once in a while. Or where was the moose? There was a moose not too long ago who wasn't where he was supposed to be. But yeah, yeah, like they are perfectly capable. He's looking for a girlfriend. That's what the consensus at work is, that he's looking for a girlfriend, and he's misguided. He's going the wrong way. And I think didn't they trank him and move him? Yeah. And so sometimes they will do that. Not often. Usually if it makes the news, my experience is if it makes the news, then they get a little more excited down at CPW. We did that one. Go forward. So if you're interested in getting involved, like I said, we need volunteers all the time. We have internship programs. We have animal care volunteers. They're a 5-hour shift once a week. We have mice team volunteers. These are volunteers who can only come in for a couple of times a week for a couple of hours at a time. And maybe they can't come in every week. Maybe they can only come in a couple of times a week or a couple of times a month, or they come in specifically for specific jobs. For example, we can't put animals in Rubbermaid bins without holes in them. They die. They have to have air. So sometimes we need somebody to come and hot glue screening to the top of the bins if we cut the lids out of them, or drill holes into the lids and the sides of the containers, so that these guys can they get quarters according to their size. So when we get little tiny baby squirrels in, they get a little tiny bin. And as they get bigger, they get a small wire cage, and then a medium wire cage, and a large wire cage. And then they got to go outside to the cages that are even bigger. So a lot of times we just need help maintaining some of those things. And it's only a 2-hour project, and we'd be really grateful if you wanted to come in and do that. If you wanted to come and work at the front desk, I would love to have you. Anybody that wants to go out and teach kids with me, I will take. We do have all kinds of outreach and education events. We do some fundraising and special events, and then our board of directors is all kinds of fun. That's them wheeling themselves around in the wheelbarrow they were supposed to be working. And then we're also always looking for release sites. That's one of the most difficult things. And not for every species is it difficult, but for some of them it's very difficult. We as people have decided in our infinite judgment that raccoons are trash pandas and they're horrible and we don't want them around. Well, they are kind of destructive and kind of can make a mess, but we can, do things to mitigate those problems. And they also serve a role in the ecosystem. So we need them, but people don't want them back. They're more than happy to bring them to us. But as soon as we call and say, hey, that raccoon that you brought to us, he's looking so, can we bring him back to you? And they're like, no. Well, part of the problem we run into is we have to put them back within 10 miles of where they came from. And if we can't do that, then we have to get permission from our district wildlife manager and whatever place we're going to put them in, their permission to release them outside of that 10 miles. So we try to put them right back, which means we're always in need of release sites because people don't want some things back. They'll bring me coyotes and foxes that are mangy and jacked up, but then they don't want to take them home. And those animals, especially adult animals, I think, baby animals, I'm a little more like, yeah, he's never been anywhere. He's going to be fine wherever you put him. But those adult animals have been in the same area for however long they've been alive. They know where the food resources are. They know where the water resources are. They have den sites. Mammals usually have 2 dens at least, so that if one is infected with mites or something, they can ditch and leave really quickly. So we need to put them right back where they came from. And so if you lived like 2 miles from where that guy came from, I could put him there and he would find his way back. He wouldn't even stay long. Birds, it's a little different. A lot of times with them, our big concern, especially at the end of the season, is making sure that those migrating species end up released with their friends. So we had a hummingbird a couple of years ago. So they go into torpor, which is like a mini hibernation kind of when it gets too cold. And so they had found this guy next to the feeder on the deck and it had gotten too cold. So warmed him up and he was fine to go. But we started doing some research on eBird to find out where his friends were. His friends were in Arizona. He'd missed it. By 3 weeks, he totally missed his window. So we got in our car, we got permission from CPW, we got permission from Arizona, and we drove him to the border to let him go so that he could get into his migration pattern. If we'd have let him go from here, he wouldn't have caught up and he probably wouldn't have survived. So birds are a little different in that, first of all, they have to be with their friends. Like Pete the pelican, he got to go with his friends. And we need to make sure that there are others of their kind in the area. So that's a big deal for that. Any other questions? So, Colorado Parks and Wildlife is our governing agency. Wildlife rehabilitation is a licensed profession. So in order to do it, you have to be licensed by them to do it. I think we have 8 licensed rehabbers on staff at Greenwood currently. I think it's the individuals that are licensed. We house their practice, kind of, I think is works. So this is a great question. We do not have a college program for wildlife rehabilitation. And the reason that we don't is that the rules in every state are so different that you couldn't really craft one effectively. For example, in Texas, anything goes. Like they don't have very strict wildlife regulations. You can have a pet fox, you can have a pet raccoon. The vets down there will treat it. In Colorado, I had a vet somebody took a Vesper sparrow into a vet's office, and the vet told her that if she left it, he would have to euthanize it because he's not licensed for wildlife. And so she called us and it came to us, which is fine. You know, we are licensed for those guys. So it they're our governing agency. They provide our license and tell us what we can and can't do. And we try to really, really work with them and stick with it. First of all, we love what we do. And we wouldn't ever want anybody to come in and say, you can't do it anymore. And so it's better to work with them than against them. And then also, you know, if you're inside of the system, you have a better chance of making changes or suggesting changes or you know, guiding the outcomes. There are a lot, you know, it used to be a lot it it used to be a lot looser and the outcomes were a lot worse. So at one point there was you know, there was a rehabber who was keeping animals in her facility's restrooms. So they had, you know, all of their animal care spaces were filled, and rather than set limits and not take anything more, they would just, you know, filter into like restrooms or break rooms or sheds and things like that. So it's really good to work with them, and they're not hard rules. It's common sense stuff. They're not all about the big game. They are a little about the big game, but they're not all about it. And they are totally willing to work with us. So we have a good relationship with them and we strive to keep it that way. I got to go and talk to all of their wildlife officers about euthanasia in the field because they are licensed to do it, but they oftentimes don't know when it's appropriate. They know for elk or moose or big critters, but they don't know that the squirrel lying on its side breathing like this is probably just better off if you just help him pass than to bring him, you know, through the stress of bringing him down. So it's interesting that they're also looking for more information. They ask about what kind of questions I ask people on the phone. And it kind of makes sense, right? I play 20 questions every day. What are you seeing? Where are you? Where's the animal? Have you touched anything? Did you have gloves on? You know, I ask as many questions as I need to have clarity about what they're seeing so that I can help guide them towards the best outcome. And it's interesting that CPW officers don't necessarily know those things either. Like they don't, you know, we joke oftentimes about the symptoms of death. Like sometimes they just need somebody to remind them that, hey, this is a symptom of death and you can make this better without bringing an animal to us. And then also the other thing that happens is they feel bad because they spent a lot of time and energy bringing an animal to us and we euthanize it. And, you know, so the opposite is true. Well, if I'd have known that, I would have just taken care of it myself. So it's interesting that they're starting to reach out for a different kind of information than maybe they have in the past. No, it's kind of cool. It's interesting to watch and fun to learn. Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain how Greenwood gets funding, and isn't there a way to support Greenwood through your state tax refund?
So the state tax refund part, I'm not sure about, but I do think I saw something that you could check a box for us, but I'm not sure. We are not funded by Colorado Parks and Wildlife. We're not funded by any government agency. We do have 3 contracts, one with Boulder County, one with the city of Boulder, and one with the city of Longmont to help their animal control officers with wildlife. So they bring us wildlife all the time. But outside of that, we're private donations funded. So all private donations, which is pretty cool. Yeah, because we managed to be alive for like 42 years, I think, this year, 43. All
This
right.
was so informative, Ollie.
Oh, thanks for
Really
coming.
And,
Oh.
yeah, this is great. Thanks for coming.
You're welcome.
And, boy, I can't wait to give you a call and see what's happening there.
Right, exactly. All right, well, thank you.
And, our next talk is going to be the geology of Estes Valley, the changing geology of Estes Valley. And the speaker will be a professor from, I think she's CU, Ellen Wall. So,
Is anybody welcome to come to your talks?
sure. And you got 'em on Zoom too.
That's awesome.
Oh, I didn't. But it's early December.
The date for that talk is early December, the 7th or 8th.
Yeah. Yeah. It will, yeah. It should be already.
My dad's a geophysicist. That's why I was like, oh, I'm gonna come talk. It'll feel like home.
You were great.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks for having me. Can I
You wanna go?
stop sharing? Okay. There we are.